when I really started to see this reptilian connection, it started around the mid 1990s when I met loads of people in a very short time, even though I was moving from place to place and city to city in America, who told me about how they'd seen people, apparently human, turn into a reptilian figure and then back again. And I talked to other people in the military industrial complex, whistleblowers, who told me about the reptilian connection in the underground bases. So, what uh, Daryl is talking about fits entirely with that. And it would seem that there are reptilians within the earth, as Daryl has been talking about, but they're also interdimensional. They're also operating in other dimensions, which is a major reason why overwhelmingly people don't see them. They say, well, if there's reptilians, where are they? Well, if you could just realize the tiny band of frequency that humans can actually see, it's ludicrously narrow, called visible light. Well, basically, we can hardly see anything. And I don't think that's an accident at all. I think that's by design. Because if we had a much wider visual acuity, we would see these entities in a wider energetic frequency state than we currently do. They're operating outside of human sight, those that are of the interdimensional variety.
Several months ago, I didn't anticipate that you'd be on a whirlwind tour speaking. So here I am catching you when you're exhausted after
No,
being
no,
on the
no.
road. So thanks.
I'm,
Thank you so much
I'm
for being
fine.
on.
I don't, I'd never, I'd never let them make me exhausted.
Uh, well,
Just keep
I
going.
yeah, I watched you on Iconic, and of course, Gareth does a great job. And I've got to see Jamie a lot in the last year because he's been doing the dot connector, and it's good to see him. He's terrific. He's so smooth. Both of those guys are naturals.
Yeah, they are, and very different in their presentation, which reflects their personalities really.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think one of the things that has kind of emerged with um, the citizen media, if you like, is a lot of the myths have disappeared in terms of, first of all, television presenting, as it's called, always a television presenter. And all you're doing is chatting to the audience. That's all you're doing. It's like writing books. Oh, I'm a writer, right? No, you're just chatting to the reader. That's all you're doing. It's so a lot of the myths have disappeared, and we have seen just how much talent there is out there that never gets into the mainstream.
Mm.
Far better than the mainstream, actually. So it's been an interesting watch for me as a former TV presenter.
Well, no, I agree. It's and that's why I gravitate to you. I just want to know what the hell is going on in this world.
Yeah, me
And
too.
and one way I've been doing that, David, is I just want to cover this ground quickly. I have read everything you need to know all the way through. Uh, then came the trap. I've read this guy, and then I've read the dream, and I just finished the reveal last Saturday. And
Right. Well,
this book is so intense, very intense. The chapter on Musk is very dense, and the chapter on plasma is so wild, and it ties in with your theories about this reality being a simulation.
yeah. Well, I think you how can you possibly understand what's going on in the world if we don't understand at least the foundations of what reality is? I mean, for instance, if you are in a situation where your your view is that we live in a solid world, and it's everything is solidity, then when it's not, and that which is controlling you ultimately knows that it's not, then you are immediately in an extraordinarily subordinate position of understanding what's going on. Because and so if you look at what we call the education system, programming system, and you look at the mainstream media, great chunks of the alternative media as well, actually, they are basically saying that this world is as we experience it when it's not. And those in the background manipulating things know that it's not. And they know that it's far more malleable than it appears to be, because solidity is not malleable in the same way as information and energetic fields are malleable. And so you have this immediately through suppressing an appreciation that reality is not actually like we experience it. You put yourself in a terrifically powerful position of controlling the perception of the population, which is the foundation of the whole conspiracy. It's control of perception, because from perception comes behavior. You want to control behavior, control perception. And so the stadium in which the whole thing's played out is the manipulation of human perception, which takes endless forms. But the foundation of it is, don't let them know what reality is, because then they might suss a few things about how we're manipulating them, which otherwise they won't know. And one of the things that relates to what Daryl's talking about is to add to that control of perception, that control of the sense of the possible, which is the whole massive foundation of this. Because if you can control and suppress the population's sense of the possible, then when people start talking about things that are way, way beyond their sense of the possible, they'll just wave their hand and say, you're mad, or you're crazy, or it's not possible. And so what we have all over human society is a fake technological cutting edge. So you have these fake cutting edges all over the place, because then the population think, well, okay, well, that's the limit of the possible at the moment. So you have Musk putting these rockets into the air and what have you. It's a fake cutting edge. You have his Neuralink company taking bits of the skull away to put probes in into the brain. I mean, that's a fake cutting edge. That's not how it's being done, really. But it's selling a concept at the same time. But you hold the fake cutting edge, and what that means is that you can play out technology that suits your control agenda, your perceptual control agenda, actually, that's been developed in the underground bases and the secret projects way back. And you can play it out in a sequence so that it appears that this is being invented following what was invented before. And of course, the scale and nature of advancement of technology is increasing all the time, to the point where you don't see any delay almost now. It's just getting faster and faster. And the reason they can do that is it already exists. It's just a matter of creating cover stories and cover people to explain how this technology came about, when actually it was invented and ready a long time ago. But there's a sequence because humanity has to believe that there is a sequence of discovery, a sequence of invention. Because if something suddenly came out of nowhere that was way beyond anything anyone's ever seen before, they say, well, where the bloody hell's this come from? So the sequence negates that, as do the cover stories of how it came about.
Well, yes. So Daryl has experienced this firsthand. In the trap, I'll read this passage. This is what Daryl has experienced, and I'll give Daryl the floor here. From the trap, Daryl says, "What I saw from my own eyes is they have a machine that can take consciousness from a body, and then another being can put its consciousness into that body, almost like astral projection, and use it as like a tool and be able to walk around just like a normal person." Maybe that explains a lot of our politicians and things like that. So, Daryl, maybe this is a good point for you to talk about your experiences generally from the start, and just give an overview of what you experienced in the underground bases.
Well, from the start, it was 2004, and I just arrived in St. Mulligan, and it was, I think, about March, springtime, early spring, maybe late winter. And yeah, I mean, right away, I had to escort some civilian workers into the corporation Siemens and to the underground base. One of the guys came into the garage and told me I had to help them, escort them in. And I only had a secret clearance. I didn't have a top secret clearance, so it would seem strange. And I went in, and there was something like a metal detector. It looked like you'd see it at an airport or a courthouse or something like that. Rectangular size, rectangular top. It had a small ramp you had to step over with the black and yellow caution tape. And the first guy from Siemens said, "I'm not walking through that bloody thing." So I thought, well, I don't want to walk through it either. So I tried to walk around, and there was a guard behind a table, an English, British Army guard. And he said, "No, you walk through." So I walked through, and I watched them fix like a pump, and that was about it. And I actually had to be escorted by somebody else who had a higher clearance than myself into the underground base. And then, yeah, after that, I had a 0000 to 4 a.m. watch on a Friday. And I saw Michael Aquino, who's a colonel, lieutenant colonel. And he was looking through some papers on the quarterdeck desk. And I think maybe they were mine. I think maybe he wanted to see me, I don't know, just in person or something, whatever that scanner did. I think he was looking through things like that. And I talked to him for a while. I recognized him right away because he was on Oprah and he was on Geraldo when I was a kid. And he was part of the whole Presidio scandal, daycare center and a military base, I believe in San Francisco, California. And yeah, there was over 50 charges of pedophilia he had, and everything was dropped. And I found out later it was because everybody was in on it, kind of thing. It was like the judge was part of it. The judge was like a Satanist. He was part of this. I don't even think he got a picture taken. I don't think he got booked. I don't think he got fingerprinted or anything. I think it was immediately dropped. And I talked to him for a while, and it was just a small conversation. He asked me where I was from and how I liked England. And then I just went for another round around the base. I walked around the base. And then I had another 0000 to 4 a.m. watch. And when I walked in, sat down, and the petty ops of the watch, he pointed at the computer monitor and he said, "What do you think about that?" And it just looked like a picture of a stereotypical gray and black and white kind of a picture. And I said, "What, did you get that off the internet?" And he said, "No, look." And when you walked into the base, there were these sliding glass doors, and next to it was this big window with a room behind it. And behind that window, there was like a gray, I guess you would say, but it was kind of a light brown, like a light khaki brown with a hue of pink about it. Had the big black eyes, really no nose, small mouth, had a fold of skin from its tear ducts down to its cheeks. And he said, "Do you mind if it comes in here?" And I said, "Does it mind if I look at it?" And I heard it say no in my head. And he said no, and it walked through the sliding glass door. And it had what looked like a pistol in its hand to me. And I just got back from Iraq, so, you know, I started saying gun, gun, gun. I thought it was coming after me with a gun. I was already very alarmed. You know, I was very upset, scared. I didn't know whether to freeze or run or kick it across the room. I didn't know what to do. So I just stayed still, and, you know, everybody said it's not a gun. And it put its hand out, and it showed it to me. And it just looked like a silver pistol to me. So then I thought maybe it's a syringe. Maybe it's going to inject me with something. I don't know. My head was just going a mile a minute. And it turned out it was a drill. And on the floor there was just this old Dell computer. And it took it apart very quickly. It didn't have to guide the bit in or anything. It just, every time it hit the screw like a machine. And it was catching the screws with the other hand. And its hands were very long. It had to hold its hands in like T-shape. The palms were very long. The fingers were very long. But it had 5 fingers. I remember that. And it had like big, thick knuckles. Almost like it kind of gave you that feeling like a spider or something when you saw it. And, yeah, I took it apart in seconds, you know, just very quick. Slid the top off, popped out 2 gigs of RAM, put it on top of the table, grabbed 2 more that were already waiting for it, put them in, slid it back down, and it kind of flicked its hand forward and was able to set a screw between its fingers every time, and it just put it together almost as quickly as it took it apart. And it just stood there for a while, and I kind of, you know, if I looked that way, it would turn its head for me. If I looked the other way, it kind of just let me look at it. I looked at its hands. It moved its hands back and forth for me. It was just completely smooth, you know, no nipples, navel, genitals, nothing. And after a while, I remember in my head, I said, "Can I touch you?" And there was no response. So I leaned forward to touch it, and the first-class petty officer said, "Don't touch it." And so I leaned back, and I got kind of almost, you know, I kind of started looking around, getting almost bored. They were just letting me observe this thing. I found out later they call them drones. They have like a hive consciousness. They're kind of like an organic machine. They're like a machine that's grown that can do, you know, take apart machines. They're for preventive maintenance and things like that, and the programs and repairs, like that. But yeah, I got kind of bored with it, walked away, and then it walked back into the underground base, the sliding glass doors. And the petty officer of the watch said, "Do you think you could work around something like that?" I said, "I don't see why not." And then he said, "You're smart." And I said, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah, very smart." And I said, "Well, how smart?" Like 140, 150 IQ. And he said, "More like 190, 195. And I said, "Well, how do you know that?" And he pointed at the computer monitor, and there were like these color-coded lines. And there was one right above me, and then there was like a gap, and then there was the rest of the people. And they kind of went up and down a little bit, just went from side to side. And he started telling me things like, you know, you smoke. I smoked at the time. And he said, "We don't have any clots because you drink." I drank at the time. And he just knew all these things about me. And I asked him how he knew. And he said, "You know, that scanner you walk through, they call it a scanner with the thing that looks like a metal detector." And then he started asking me questions like, "Do you have any tattoos?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Good, the Germans don't like tattoos." And I said, "Germans?" And he said, "Yes, there's Germans up there." And I said, "What do you mean? In space?" He goes, "Yeah, it's kind of like that." He really didn't call it space. And he said, "But they're in the moon and beyond." And I asked what it was, and he said, we don't know. All we know is they've been here as long as we have. And we got into a war with them, and we had outside help, but we participated in the war long ago. And I kind of think that's what the Hindu text of the War of the Gods and things like that would be about. And he said that the war was a stalemate, so they got the underground and we got everything above. And that's kind of like how it worked. So all the underground bases belonged to them, belonged to the reptiles, greys, elongated skulls, things like that. And we got the outside world. And he asked if I have any hobbies, and I said I used to play classical guitar. He said, "Oh, they're really like that." And I said, "What do you mean they?" And he wasn't being very particular. He wasn't really giving me great details. And he said, "With your scores, you'll become an officer, so you'll have plenty of time to practice." And that's, you know, how that night went. Then Monday, the executive officer came to the garage where I worked and asked to see me. I took a walk for him. At first it was small talk. How do you like England? Things like that. Then when we got further away, he said, it's very amazing, isn't it? And I said, yes. And I knew exactly what he was talking about. And I mean, well, while it was happening, I forgot to say I was pinching myself. And I remember the first class petty officer said, you know, do you think you're dreaming? And I said, no, I want to have a mark in case you wipe my mind. Because I had all these different scenarios running through my head. And he said, well, you're going to remember this for now. When I woke up, you know, I had a blood blister on my thigh. And then I came out of the room, you know, got dressed, and I came out of the room. One of the guys said, what did you think? And I said, what? And he said, you know, long spindly fingers, big black eyes, kind of creepy looking. And I said, oh, yeah, right. And it was like I forgot. It was almost just like something so incredible that it was almost like it was blocked from my mind. Like I just didn't want to accept it. I didn't want to talk about it with anyone. I didn't want to think it was like something crazy. But it was just the guys in the underground base. They worked around different species, I guess you would call them, drones and reptiles and things. And it was elongated skulls. And it was just quite normal for them to see one walking through the halls and everything when they were working in the underground base. So I was talking to the executive officer, and, you know, he said, it's pretty amazing. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, you know, talked about my IQ. And he said, asked me if I ever heard of Gary McGinnon. And this was only like a year ago. So it was kind of a current event in the UK area. And he explained how he hacked into NASA, and he found all these files in the US Army, US Navy, and NASA. And in the US Navy, he found a file called Solar Warden, how there were all these volatile chemicals being shipped off world, is how it was said. Ranks and social security numbers of, you know, extraterrestrial officers, pictures of cigar-shaped craft over the moon. And he said, it's all real, all of it. That's just kind of how he leveled it with me. And he said, with your scores, I guarantee you'll become pilot of a 4-kilometer-long starship. And I found that just extremely hard to believe. And in my head, it was almost like, you know, I thought it was like a practical joke. My mind still wasn't really wrapping around it. Like I didn't know what to think. And because it was just happening fast. Boom, boom, boom. Next day, things were happening. They wanted to get me in as quickly as possible, it seemed like. And I thought about it a moment, and I said that machine I walked through, it could detect if you had clots in your body. And he said, yes. And I said, well, my father died of something called a widowmaker. We had a clot in one of his heart arteries, and it broke off, and he died. And he said, if we had technology like that, it would have saved his life. I said, why isn't, you know, technology like this available to the public? And he went on about population control and everything else. And I said, well, there has to be a side, like a faction or a side or something that wants to release it to the public. And he said, you mean like a traitor? And I said, no, sir. I mean, there just has to be a side. He said, well, there is. And I said, well, if you can get me on that side, I'll do it. And walked down a little bit further. We were talking about different things. Eventually, I shook his hand and I saluted him. And he said, one more thing, Mr. James. And he was calling me Mr. this whole time, which is only officers call each other Mr. in the Navy. He said, you're going to be escorted by a reptile, and he's big. And I really didn't know what he was talking about or what to think of it when he said that. Because I had only seen the drone. I'd only seen it was probably about 2.5 feet tall, I guess. Small thing. And then one time we were in the barracks, and this was like soon after that. And one of the guys said something like, hey, did you see that reptile today? And another guy said, yeah, it was big. And someone else said it talked funny too. And in my head, I was kind of thinking, you know, a reptile like a monitor lizard. I still hadn't put it in my head, like I hadn't thought about any, like a humanoid reptile. And I said, you mean like, you know, reptiles just walk around? And I was thinking maybe they're in the caves or something. Maybe there are caves down there. I didn't go very far or deep into it yet. And he said, yeah, there's reptiles in the underground base, and they talk. And I said, they walk around on all fours and they talk to you? And they said, no, they walk upright like us. They're humanoid. And then one of the other ones went on about how there's elongated skulls down there. And I think he said their average IQ is 160. So they're very smart. They're really intelligent ones are well over 200. And he said that they were cannibals in the sense that they were closely enough related to us to where they do eat people, but they're so genetically close to us, it would be considered cannibalism. And they can have offspring like us, but they're kind of like mules in the sense that the offspring is sterile. Like they can have children with us, but the offspring is sterile. And they like our classical art and our classical music. And then, so that was, you know, probably that same day. And then on Tuesday, we're, you know, watching TV or playing, we were playing a game. Halo was big at the time. And one of the guys said, yeah, man, I was on the Mines of the Moon, and they used to put us in all these work parties. They used to put us in work parties, and they would put shock collars on us. And if somebody in the party didn't work hard enough, everybody would get shocked. And he said there were all these brothels. Your only motivation to work was sex. And so I asked him, I said, well, you know, because I thought maybe they did this to everybody, and I just wind up in mines or something, according to what he was saying. And I said, well, the XO himself came up to me and offered me a job, you know, as a pilot of a 4-kilometer-long starship. Did he do that to you? And he said, no, I just volunteered for it. I heard about it and I volunteered for it. He said, you know, they're going to treat you well. You're going to be up there. And he said that they put you in this chair and all you have to do is fight it. He said, if you fight it, you'll remember. He said, when you come back, they'll put you in a chair. And if you fight it, you'll remember. And as he was saying these things, I heard like this feedback loop come into the room. And it said, now hear this, now hear this. You are now in violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, Articles 7 and 8. If you do not stop right now, you will face up to 10 years in prison and $100,000 in fines. That'll be all. And I looked around and I said, is there a speaker in here? And they said, no, with the technology they have, they don't need speakers. And I kept on pressing the question, but the other guys said, you know, they're listening right now. We can't talk about it. And so the next day I ran into the same person. Everybody called him Lando. His name was Orlando, but he liked Star Wars. So everybody called him like Lando. And he said, did you hear that voice? It was the same one that told me about, you know, the drone, the kind of creepy looking. And he said, did you hear that voice in the room? And I said, yes. And he said, you know, by the underground base on the tower, there's those rectangular boxes next to the radio tower. And I said, yes. And he said, that's 5G tech. It's something new that they're using on this base. And they can actually project like a microwave beam into a room, and they can see everything, they can hear everything, and they can talk to you. And he said, like, some people are afraid of it because it can hurt people or give you cancer. And he said, well, it's only if they run the beam like directly through your head that they could do that. But it's more or less just like to monitor people, to get the lookout for people, as far as what he knew. And I asked him what it was like, you know, in the underground base, what it looked like. And he said he kind of described it. It's almost like a remote control helicopter kind of controls, where like 2 small knobs that you move around and it moves around. And it's just on a monitor and you can watch it. And so yeah, that happened that day. And then it was like a Thursday, the night before I was going to volunteer for the program. And I was in the TV room of the barracks, and the door was open, and the room across was, that door was open, but it was one of those situations where it seemed like this person was talking to somebody else, but he wanted me to overhear him. And he said, you're going to be taken into a room, and you're going to be strapped down to a chair. It's a density chamber, and it artificially pushes you up from 3rd to 5th density, because we're in 3rd, and the ETs we work with are in 5th density. He said, they're much too strong and fast for us. We wouldn't be able to work density. And he said, you'll become stronger, faster, your IQ will go up 200 points, and you'll become more of a collective. And I overheard that, and then next day happened, and I put on my working blues, and I went to the quarterdeck, and I started right away. It was that same first class petty officer, and he had me signed all these papers, and he just was flipping it for me. You know, it was already X, initial here, sign here. And in the beginning, I was reading it, and it was saying things like the consciousness of the first party now belongs to the second party. The wording of it was like that, and it seemed very strange. And I got cold feet, and I said, I don't know if I should be doing this. Like, I don't want to sign this. I tried to read it. He said, we'll be here all night if you read this. And it was a stack about that big. And I was reluctant, and he said, look, you're already back there, so just sign the papers. So he was saying that I had already come back to the program and been age regressed. And that was something else that the XO said that I forgot to say. He said, you know, we'll put you in the program for 20 years, send you back in time 20 years, wipe your mind, and you wake up in bed. So I forgot to point that out. But yeah, he said, you're already back there, so just sign the papers. So I kind of said, like, I'm doing this, you know, in my head, I said, I'm doing this for Dad, and I just signed it. I just signed everything. And I sat down, and he got on the phone. He said, send him in. And I was kind of daydreaming, and 5 minutes went by, and he said, all right, go with him. And behind that same big glass window, there was this big, like, reptile. He was huge, like 9.5 feet tall. He kind of had to, like, hunch down in the room to fit in, and his shoulders were really very big. He had ridges going down his head, almost like mohawks. He had gold, like, crocodile eyes. His mouth went straight across and then up. Didn't really have a nose or ears. It was kind of flat. His face was kind of flat. And he was wearing, like, a tight blue suit. And, you know, I said, Jesus Christ, he's not going to eat me, is he? And he said, if he wanted to eat you, he's much stronger and faster than you. He would have done it by now. And eventually he walked out of that room and walked into the quarterdeck so I could really see him up close. And there was a different guard this time, a younger kid, smaller, skinnier. And so I got up, and eventually I just went with him because he was in this room with me, and I knew he was faster than me, so I couldn't run away, is how it felt. And so I just went. And we were walking down, and the guard kept on butt stroking me, hitting me in the back, like right in the spine between the shoulder blades. At first I thought it was because I was looking around, and he just kept doing it. And there was white, blue, and red stripe on the floor. And white was secret, blue was top secret, and red was above top secret. So red went everywhere, blue went to fewer places, white just went down main halls. And there were some hallways that were just completely dark with no light. And those were only red. We immediately went down one of those hallways, and no light came on. I thought maybe like an automatic light would come on when I first saw it, but no light came on. So I thought, well, I guess these things can see in the dark pretty well. So I was staying close to it to keep up with it. And he kept on hitting me. And I thought to myself, if he hits me one more time, I'm going to, you know, do something. And he hit me again. And I turned around and I grabbed his weapon and I put my foot behind his feet and I just threw him down to the ground and knocked the wind out of him. And I held a weapon over him by the barrel and I said, you know, if you hit me with this weapon one more time, I'm going to shove it up your ass sideways. And I heard the reptile say, leave us. And it was kind of like, leave us. It was very deep at first, but it seemed like he had to push out the last syllable. It got a little bit higher. And the kid got up, he looked at me, looked at his weapon, looked at me, looked at the weapon. I just held it out and he grabbed it and he walked away. And when I turned around, the reptile was just right in front of me. Like, you know, just there. And I looked up and I remember seeing his like eyes peering over his chest muscles, and he was just kind of flexing all his muscles to show me how big he was. And the first thing that came to my head was, you know, I'm sorry about what I said before. You're much more civilized than him. And at first his eyes were kind of small because they don't bare their teeth or furrow their brows. They don't have any muscles, kind of like a reptile in their face. You can just tell they're aggravated with you by, you know, their eyes will get small. And his eyes were small. And when I said that, they opened up normally. And he just turned around and he said, follow me. And I was looking around and I saw bicycles leaning up against the wall, like golf carts. It was kind of going gradually downhill. You could feel it. And eventually we got to, you know, like a 3-step walk, like with a watertight door with the wheel and everything you see on subs and chips and things like that. And when we got in, I saw this chair, and it was very big, like it was meant for them. It was very wide. It was black. It had like holes in it, and there were straps on it. And he said, get in the chair. And like when I was a kid, we had the DARE program with Nancy Reagan, Ronald Reagan's wife. And it was like to stop drugs and crime. And I remember they took a gas chamber chair with the bucket underneath it and the chain and everything that lowers into the bucket, causes the chemical reaction. And they put this in the trailer and they showed it to us when we were like 6. And it was just like a traumatic event for me. And it really frightened me as a young kid. And when I saw this, you know, I saw the airtight door and I saw the chair. I thought, this is a gas chamber. He's going to try to kill me. Even though everything I was told, you know, that was what I thought, because I was pretty scared being with him. I had never seen anything like this before. And my nerves were already shot. Grabbed me, threw me into the chair, held me down, strapped me in. I was struggling, trying to getting away here and there every now and again, and it would push me back in. And eventually, it like headbutted me and knocked me out for a second. And I came to, and he like leaned in, and he was like growling, but it was kind of like hear it, but you feel the percussion in your chest, and the water shakes when they do it. And it was kind of like a growl like that. And as he got closer, it became more audible. And he said, "Don't make me hit you again." And when he got really close, I jammed my thumb in its eye because it was so close to my face. I thought it was going to bite me or something. And it leaned back, kind of closed its eyes, and it just leaned forward and just collapsed my chest until it pushed against my heart, and I blacked out. I came to, and I was completely strapped in. "Do this to you." And he went to like a panel, but I couldn't see it because it was on, you know, the same side of the wall that the door was on, and he was doing something. And he walked out, tightened the door. It felt almost like, I guess, like an out-of-body experience. It was like a weightlessness, cold, and peace is kind of how it felt. And then it was almost like I could feel my soul, my consciousness kind of getting lifted out of myself. And I came to, and the straps were undone, and I saw this same reptile, his back was towards me. And he was talking to what looked like a Gestapo. He was actually a first-class petty officer on base. And he had an undercut, you know, shaved on the sides, you know, blonde, slick back with pomade. He was wearing like, you know, the typical trench coat, the leather coat, no hat. And it looked like he was talking to him, but he wasn't talking. He was like gesturing, and he looked like mournful for it. And I saw the reptile with his back towards me doing the same thing, kind of moving its hands around. And I slid off the chair, and one of the footrests hit me in the back, and I kind of was just waving around, like swerving around, and I said, "Can I go to bed now?" And then I fell down to my hands and knees, and I saw his boots go into my vision, and he said, "I should have you executed for what you did to my man. Do you hear me?" And the reptile said, "It doesn't matter. He doesn't remember." And I just fell down and just passed out. And I woke up, and it was carrying me like a duffel bag under its arm. And my head was facing the opposite way, and it was like right on my bladder. And I remember I said, you know, I have to pee. I said, "Please put me down. I have to use the bathroom." And it wasn't listening. I just passed out again. And then I saw like a bright light, and then all of a sudden I was in like a hospital room. And I found out later through the executive officer that was a looking glass technology. He told me all this stuff before I got out of the Navy. He said all underground bases have looking glass technology. They all have med beds. They all have healing tanks, age regression. They all have this technology in all these underground bases around the world because it belongs to them. Like it belongs to the reptiles. It doesn't belong to the people who they say it belongs to. And he laid me down on a medical bed, a regular medical bed with the railings on the sides. It was very wide again, like I said, like it could have been made for one of them, like something larger. And I heard like ripping and tearing, and then I felt like somebody putting something on my chest, and I looked down, and it was just like stickers, like you would heart monitor stickers and things like that. And I remember the reptile said he has to urinate, and I heard like one long tear, and then it was like a woman that put a catheter in me. And it was actually a woman from the base named April. And she was actually in IT, like she fixed computers and things. So I guess she volunteered for this program and became a nurse. And I was on the moon, or in the moon. And I said something to her, like I was really out of it. It was very loopy. I felt almost drugged or drunk. Everything was different. Colors were different. Color spectrum goes up. You find yourself going down your own timeline is what ETs call it. That's kind of like what fit density is like. In other words, you'll go maybe 5-10 years into your own future and kind of observe your own future. And the person that's you there right now in the present knows that you're observing you in the future. They can sense it. It's like you could feel your own past self kind of doing this and then coming back, and you don't know, like it's a very, time is an illusion is a lot more apparent, I guess you would say, like in fifth density. And I said something to her like, "You're really pretty." And then I asked her if I could hold her hand, and she said, "Give me a moment." She was doing more things, and she held my hand and passed out. I passed out, and I woke up the next day, and I was by myself. And it took her about an hour to come in, and she came in, and it was just like a white room. And there was a table next to the entrance, and she put her bag down next to the table, and she got out a smart glass pad, which is what like the smartphone was based off of. And I was told that whenever you see smartphones, that's how you know that like more technology is going to come. Like it's going to take time. It's going to come out like in a trickle, but other technologies are eventually going to start coming. And the smartphone is going to be one of the first things that you're going to see, which is based off the smart glass pad. And she put her palms on the corners, and it's kind of like most of the tech is like a telepathic link. And they look for people. You have to have at least 110 IQ to even get into the space program. That's just to work in the mines. There's something about the density change. If you don't have like above average intelligence, you can't handle the density change. And yeah, she put her hands in the corner. The image came up of like a humanoid. She was able to put her finger in it, kind of turn it around. The body would turn. She put her hand in it and open it up. You'd see the heart, the circulatory system. So she was like giving me a physical with this. And then she was about to leave, and I said, "Please don't leave me." And she said, "I'll be back tomorrow." And I said, "I don't know what to do or to say." I held her hand and I said, "I don't know what to do or what to say, but I don't want you to leave me." And she liked that, so she took me out, and it seemed like a shift change. Like they were all men walking on the ground level. It was probably 5 or 6 floors up. It looked like we were in the courtyard of a condominium, and I saw like women waving. Some of them had babies. And then behind me, there was like a tram, like a train. And there were men in like gray jumpers, like going to this tram. And there were 4 lifts on the floor in the middle of like this courtyard area. And she took my hand and walked me up on one of these lifts. And we went up and went directly to her room. But there was no railings on the lifts or anything like that. And there was a woman on the sidewalk of the top floor that we were on. And she had her baby, and she was just standing there. And there was no railing on these sidewalks. And I said, "Aren't you afraid you're going to fall off?" And she said, "Oh, no, you can't fall off." And she stepped off. And she said, "Every floor has like this invisible field, so you can't fall off." And she said, "The kids play on it. They're not supposed to." And I said, "Well, how far does it go?" She goes, "All the way to the other side. You can just walk back and forth." And then so she took me to her room, and it was very Spartan. It was just like bare bones, like a couch, a coffee table, a bar, kitchen area. There was a table next to the door. And she took me by the hand and took me to her room, and we began to kiss. And she said, "Wait, what's your name?" And I said, "I don't remember." And she said, "Think about it. Everybody remembers their name." And I thought about it, and I said, "Daryl." And we kissed more, and we had sex. And then I fell asleep like on the headboard of the bed. And she fell asleep like on top of my chest. And I just kind of like dozed off. And then I woke. Like I had all these images like flashing where I came to. And I just kept on saying, like, you know, and that's kind of how it started out. Is that a good starting out point? Do you have any questions?
Yes, please. Let's get David's reaction, Daryl, and then you can wrap up. I know David has limited time.
Well, it's like I said at the start, you have this fake cutting edge of technological possibility, and it's way back from what's actually possible, and it's being played out into the public arena step by step in a sequence. That's why Daryl talked there about the smartphones, and of course what he said, because as I understand it, Daryl, this was in the early 2000s. You talk about 5G, 5G being used in a military base and then played out on the population. And this is precisely how it works. And for people to really grasp what's going on in this area is to understand that when things appear in the public arena of the type we're talking about, it's not because someone's just invented it. It's that their cover story is playing it out and into the public arena in this sequence. It's been my feeling for a long time now that, shall we say, at least some of these greys are actually AI. They are a form of artificial intelligence. And that's why when I watched an interview with Daryl, and he was mentioning, as he just has, that they used to refer to these gray entities as drones. That fitted perfectly with what I've been surmising for a long time now, that they are a form of artificial intelligence. And I remember when I really started to see this reptilian connection. It started around the mid 1990s when I met loads of people in a very short time, even though I was moving from place to place and city to city in America, who told me about how they'd seen people, apparently human, turn into a reptilian figure and then back again. And I talked to other people in the military industrial complex, whistleblowers, who told me about the reptilian connection in the underground bases. So what Daryl is talking about fits entirely with that. And it would seem that there are reptilians within the Earth, as Daryl has been talking about, but they're also interdimensional. They're also operating in other dimensions, which is a major reason why overwhelmingly people don't see them. They say, well, if there's reptilians, where are they? Well, if you could just realize the tiny band of frequency that humans can actually see, it's ludicrously narrow, called visible light. Well, basically, we can hardly see anything. And I don't think that's an accident at all. I think that's by design. Because if we had a much wider visual acuity, we would see these entities in a wider energetic frequency state than we currently do. They're operating outside of human sight, those that are of the interdimensional variety. And, you know, the way he's described the reptilian as like, 9 foot or whatever, that's exactly what I've come across now over, since the mid 1990s, that this reptilian race is very tall. The way he's described them is the way that they've had them described to me so many times, and also the collective, the way that ultimately this reptilian race is operating with a sort of hive mind. And this is very relevant to where we are now, because it's my contention, and again has been for a long time, that the collective mind of this reptilian race and others too, but this collective mind is being infused into humans. And this, for me, is what the whole thrust of the fusion of AI and humans is all about. You've got people like Ray Kurzweil at Google, the so-called futurist, who for years has been saying that by 2030, humans will be connected to artificial intelligence and the cloud, as he calls it. And that once that connection is made, artificial intelligence will do more and more of human thinking until human thinking is basically negligible. In other words, deleted. That's the kind of hard sell through people like Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum, through Bill Gates, through people like Kurzweil and others. So we'll be gods if we fuse with artificial intelligence. But on the other side, you've got another approach for those people who are overwhelmingly skeptical about the AI takeover. And they're being told by Elon Musk, first of all, that artificial intelligence could be the end of humanity. He said that years ago. So there's his street cred. I'm worried like you. But he's just turning out more and more AI ever since. And his approach to the skeptical, the pushbackers, as I call it, is that artificial intelligence becoming more intelligent than humans is inevitable. And thus, if we don't fuse with AI, then humans will die out. And of course, the whole thing about inevitability is a very, very powerful perceptual tool. Because when you're pushing back on something and you don't want something to happen, if you can be convinced that it's inevitable, then immediately you're now into mitigation mode. You're not saying, I'm going to stop it anymore. You're going to say, well, how do we mitigate its impact and make it not as bad as it could be? Oh, well, Elon, he's worried about it like us. And this question then comes, what is AI of the kind that they wish to connect to humans, to fuse with humans? There are many levels of AI. There's algorithmic AI. There's AI that learns from constantly being fed human input through social media and all these other sources that they do. But there's another level of AI, which I say, and this is the one that I think they're really talking about, it's actually this non-human collective mind. And they're seeking to absorb humans into that collective mind. So we become also a hive mind that perceives from a perceptual way of looking at the world that actually we're being told to think that way. And of course, at the moment, still there are people who can independently, to an extent anyway, ask questions like, well, who am I? Where am I? What is this place? What's going on? But if you are subject to a collective mind, well, that collective mind, that AI mind, is never going to ask those questions, because the AI, that which is controlling the AI, doesn't want you to ask them or query. They just want you to do whatever the collective mind tells you to do. And you can see even in the human realm now this collective mind unfolding, and how easy it is to manipulate people to perceive whatever this force wants them to perceive. So, for instance, at the moment, it's like the pushbackers are Trump's the savior, and Musk is going to help him to save us. But what we're seeing is the squeezing of the sense of reality to even among the pushbackers to right-wing politics. That's basically, this is the conspiracy. The conspiracy is the left, and to stop the left and the woke, we've got to be the right. And it's a prison cell. It's a perceptual prison cell, because what Daryl said already, and what I've written in my books over 30 years, is way, 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 way beyond left-right politics. But what's happening is people are being, their attention, their focus is being put on that, because then we don't see beyond it. And as Daryl will have found out, and my goodness me, I have over the years, if you are talking about things that are way beyond what we call the norm, what we call the norm is just the program norm, then people kind of dismiss it and think you're crazy or you can't be telling the truth. When actually all you're doing is describing things that are way beyond what people have been programmed to believe in. And the other thing he mentions there about the moon, again, I've been writing about the moon for a long time and talking to people, whistleblowers, etc. And again, the moon is not what we think it is. So when Daryl talks about being inside the moon. Well, that's where the real deal is in the moon. It's inside. So what I'm hearing, and what I've heard before in interviews that he's done, is confirming so much that I've picked up over the years. And when people talk about awakening, we must awaken. Yes, but we must keep awakening, because awakening is not something that just happens. There's a series of awakenings which take you deeper and deeper in the rabbit hole. And so what's happening now with what I call the hijacked alternative media, etc., and the Christian right politics is that they're holding the line. So you awaken to the fact that the world's not controlled by who you thought it was, not controlled by presidents and prime ministers and politicians. What they want you to do is stay there. Keep it in the realm of the scene, if you like, the realm of the five senses. Because once you open your mind and you let it flow, and you talk to people like Daryl, and talk to many people who told me similar stories over the years, then you awaken to a much greater picture than we're currently being told, not only by the mainstream, but most of the alternative.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm looking at when you talk about politics and politicians, David, the fact that we had this administration that brought about this, well, essentially an invasion of the United States over the last 4 years, and now suddenly we have Trump, who has proclaimed that he's going to send everybody back. It seems insane to me that a country would allow this to happen within the space of 4 years. And then suddenly, on a particular date, we have a different president, and now we're going to change our policies and ship them all back. I mean, how can a country have such policies? And it just seems to me that there's someone else controlling the goings on.
Yeah, I mean, what I've kind of uncovered over the years is basically this structure. You've got what I call the global cult, which is a global network of secret societies which are fiercely compartmentalized. So most of the people in the secret societies don't know the real picture. I mean, we talk about, in the Freemasons, for instance, we talk about degrees, levels of degree. Well, that's the level of degree of knowledge. That's what that is. And it's the same with all these secret societies. And the more exclusive they are, the more they know. And people like your Bill Gateses and your Klaus Schwabs, they are operatives. They are people that operate in the public arena. And therefore, overwhelmingly, they are gophers, and they're not the point where it's coming from. And I was very interested to hear you talk when I've heard your interviews about Michael Aquino, because he's been in my book since the 1990s. Because, of course, he started the Temple of Set, which was a satanic church, quote, within the military and within the U.S. military. He was at one time a buddy of Anton LaVey and the whole Church of Satan thing, till I think they fell out. And I looked when I heard you talking about him and the years that you were mentioning. He was in an operative within the underground base and the whole hidden system. And of course, in the public arena, apparently he just disappeared, and had all the controversy about him, and he kind of left, and that was that. But you were describing how he was still there. He wasn't official anymore. The real power is not in the official level, as I've just mentioned. but it was still an operative. And this is the thing that people find hard to grasp, and I do understand. But what I would say to them is this: look at the world, look at what happens in the world, look at all the war, all the suffering, all the deprivation. And you haven't got to travel around the world much to see that actually the vast majority of people called human are not having a good time. They're trying to survive another day. You look in Asia and Africa and Central America, South America. That it's not a pleasant experience they're having. And then you hear about the Christian God or the Islamic God or the Hindu God creating the world. Well, excuse me, what happens in the world doesn't really make a lot of sense if you believe that. And clearly there is a very malevolent force, a psychopathic force. And if you look at the so-called Hare test, Hare, after the guy that basically came up with it, of what are the traits of a psychopath, the top trait is lack of empathy, not having the ability to put yourself in the feelings of those you affect. The second one is lack of compassion. And that psychopathic mentality would explain the state of the world, not just now, but through what we call known human history, where the few have always controlled the many, and the many have not had a good time as a result of it. And so you are looking at a malevolent force that's behind global events. And then you say, well, what is that malevolent force? Well, it has many levels, and Reptilian is definitely one of them. But if you take this global cult, as I call it, this network of secret societies, that is the representation within the human world of this non-human force. And that non-human force, for obvious reasons, stays in the shadows. And this network of secret societies, fiercely compartmentalized, like I say, so most of them don't even know the big picture, and certainly would laugh at you if you talked about reptilians, most of them. I know because they have. But this non-human force is being represented by this cult within our reality. And it's playing out this agenda, which ultimately is coming from this non-human force. Now, as you mentioned, Daryl, the non-human element of it has all this highly advanced, beyond anything that we see in the public arena, even now, advanced technology, and it's using this cult and its control of governments, its control of government agencies, control of Silicon Valley, of the World Health Organization, the World Bank, the IMF, the World Economic Forum, on it goes, the United Nations, to have this agenda of human control through technology imposed upon the population. And, people like Elon Musk and these Silicon Valley billionaires, these AI people, Peter Thiel, and because Peter Thiel, who's the co-founder of a company called Palantir, which provides technology, data assessment, data collection, and surveillance for the intelligence community, the Pentagon, etc. Peter Thiel has funded the political career of J.D. Vance, the vice president to Trump after January. He is a member of the Bilderberg Group steering committee, Peter Thiel, which is a globalist organization pursuing a agenda to so centralized power in the world that eventually it's administered by a world government that's not even elected, it's appointed, a technocracy as they as they call it. You know, people like Ramaswamy, Vivek Ramaswamy, around Trump and Musk, is a business associate of Peter Thiel. J.D. Vance is a business associate of Peter Thiel. So, you know, these are all examples of this global cult network that's what I call involved in what I call designer manipulation, where they will sell the same policy to this group, which may well accept it, the wokers and the so-called left, and it will sell it in a completely different way to the right that is skeptical about the AI agenda. But in the end, the same outcome happens either way. And I think in this Trump administration, you're going to see apparently things that people would support happening because that's the diversion. Oh, look, that's good, that's good. But the direction of travel will be a quickening towards this fusion of humans and AI. And that, for me, is the non-human, reptilian, whatever you want to call it, hive mind being imposed on humanity. And what most of the alternative media does is it stops at what they call globalists. It's the globalist. Yeah, but what are the globalists and what's beyond them? These are the questions that we need to ask, because that's where the answers lie.
That's what we need to know. Gentlemen, I know we're in a race against the clock. Daryl, I think maybe you may want to finish up your story quickly, and then we can have David wrap it up. So I know there are a few things left dangling, so go right ahead and then finish up your story.
Well, I mean, to finish it up, it was a long time, but I mean, first I was in the mines of the moon for 3 months as punishment for poking the reptile in the eye. Then I went off to a dark fleet, which is like a breakaway German society. And then I went into Solar Warden after that. And I spent the rest of the time in that. And I knew Nordics and things like that, Pleiadians, Tigetans, I've heard them called Plagiarians. And then I was told a lot from like my executive officer about the things I would see into the future and things like that. When I came back, he realized that, you know, he said I was still partially in fifth density. He said something went wrong in the chair. He said, you didn't come down properly and you're still partially in fifth. And said that my life would be hard because I'm living in like a third density reality, but I'm still kind of partially in fifth. And he was trying to convince me to come back, you know, and to, you know, this reality. And I mean, he just told me a lot. He told me that Trump would become president, but he said it wasn't Trump. He said it was the military. He said this is like a military operation that's happening.
Yep.
Right now. He's just
Yep.
a figurehead. And yeah, he said eventually in my lifetime we would see a lot of, wouldn't necessarily be peace. Populations are going to be moved. Countries are going to be changed, things like that. But he said it would be a lot better than what our original timeline was going to become. And that's when he explained to me that it was like going to be a Mike Pence timeline, is how he put it. He said that eventually there would be breeding programs, and eventually they would, they realized they made a mistake. They had all these breeding programs, so they bred everybody together, and then they tried to extract a certain gene from the people that they bred together, and they, you know, they made one people, and then they tried to extract a gene, and that's what created like the Mike Pence people, he said. And he said that, and I said, who's Mike Pence? And he said, you know, he becomes the vice president for Trump. And he looked like him too, now that, you know, I saw him. He's had that same constant scowl. He always had like kind of like a scowl like Mike Pence. He had the black eyebrows, the pure white hair, kind of like the turned up needle nose. He said that's what was going to be our original timeline, and we wouldn't be able to evolve any further in that timeline. So we had to, you know, those people that were created, we wouldn't be able to keep on ascending, evolving into the higher level. And so he said that we had to go back in time and change the timelines and change everything. I asked if it was successful, and he said yes. And I said, well, what about your parents? He said, my mother's gone, my father's gone, my brothers and sisters are gone. And I said, well, why are you still here? And he said, I don't know. Like, he had no idea why he was still here. even though, you know, he had used looking glass technology, has seen it in the future, and saw everything worked out the way they wanted it to. But I mean, I think that's what's happening right here. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't put, you know, if you like Trump, if you don't like Trump, it doesn't matter. He even told me even if Hillary Clinton won the election or Joe Biden, this is still going forward. And he told me that it has to be difficult. And one of the things that you brought up about with, you know, Ted, with the borders and things like that, and populations are being moved. He said that they're showing us what they wanted to do to us, but like in such a fast way, because it's usually, he called the negative aspect of Earth the Satanist. And he said that the Satanists implement things over decades, and the people accept it. If you implement it over decades, they accept it. But he said they're doing it so fast right now that nobody's accepting it. Everybody's thinking like, what's happening? This isn't right. Like, you know, even your most liberal people they're getting to a point where it's, you know, this is happening much too fast, and they won't accept it basically. And so they're basically just showing us what they had in store for us. And he also said it had to be hard. He told me about the COVID thing, because they were going to do that to us as well, like giving us lethal injections, and people died from it, and people got turbo cancer and everything else and clots. But he said that there's something called DNA memory, where in order for us to kind of evolve to the next level and make sure this never happens again, this kind of tyranny we're under, it has to be difficult. It has to be hard. It has to imprint onto our DNA memory, is how he put it. And that way, it's like our future generations will kind of look, in a way, like subconsciously remember that this happened, and so it won't happen again. He said we could step in and we could solve everything right now, but in 100 years it would just happen again. Is kind of how he put it. So he said we have to go through like this painful kind of process to where, you know, a lot of people are going to die, and it's going to be a big struggle for a majority of the people, but it has to be that way. It has to be kind of like a traumatic event to get the people to wake up. It's just the way we are as human beings. It's just the way it is. It's difficult, but he told me, you know, it's going to get better. He said the economy is going to be eventually, I'm not going to say it's going to happen in, you know, the next 4 or 5 years, but he said eventually it's going to be better than the 50s. You know, you'll be able to pay off a house. You know, in 4 or 5 years, you'll be able to pay off a brand new car in 6 months. You know, money won't own us. We'll own the money. He told me all the world's gold in the catacombs of the Vatican, you know, and it's going to be taken out. Enough to make everybody on Earth a 100 millionaire. He said it was a septillion in gold, in American dollars back then. But yeah, you know, but he said it's going to become much better. I have a faith of that. I you know, despair is easy, hope is hard. That whole thing they teach you in the military, you always have hope. But yeah, I mean, I have a strong sense that it's going to get better, and eventually these technologies are going to be released to us, and you know, all these diseases aren't necessary at all, that are just to cause, like, you know, on this level of you know, this, I don't know what you'd call it, lower astral or something like that these beings kind of feed off of the pain and suffering. And that's why they want us to have diseases and war. It's almost like a drug to them. It's almost high. It keeps you under control. That spell is going to be broken, as far as what he told me in the future. You know, all these different hereditary diseases and birth defects and things like that are going to become a thing of the past. And as far as what he told me, what we originally had in store, what was going to happen, was going to be extremely bad. But what's going to happen in this new timeline that they created, it sounds, he was almost in tears. He was so proud of himself. And it sounded like, you know, it was going to be much better.
It sounds like, David, the Taltarian tiptoe has slowed down, and maybe the Loosh factory is running out of business, according to what Daryl just said. I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I hope it turns out like that. Obviously, but you know, I really I don't buy the idea that you have to suffer to evolve, and you know, we're talking about consciousness. We're not talking about a body. You know, that a human doesn't have to evolve. Their consciousness has to evolve. They're the eternal part of them. And consciousness that's already evolved comes into this reality, and then completely forgets who it is, or where it is, or what's gone before, and therefore becomes easy prey for perceptual manipulation, because it doesn't have that memory which allows it to put this reality, this human life, into the perspective it needs to be put into. So we'll see where it goes. But if consciousness does not awaken from its coma, from its perceptual prison cell, it's been very disappointing to see how easy it's been for the Trump scam to be sold on the scale it has, because people have this desire, and I do understand why. But it's time to grow up and look in the eye what we're dealing with. But they want to be told what they want to hear. If you tell people what they want to hear, the door's already flinging open because they want it to be true. When you're telling people what they don't want to hear, then the door's padlocked because they don't want it to be true. And so one of the great manipulation techniques is to tell people what they want to hear. And that's what this whole Trump situation has been doing, telling people what they want to hear. But it doesn't mean they're going to deliver it. And, what you said, Daryl, about, it's Trump, but it's not really, it's the military. I say that's absolutely right.